Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive on something really fascinating.
Yeah,
It's something that's super important, I think, especially for us here in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena.
definitely.
We're looking at Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham Jail.
It's such a powerful text.
And, even if you've read it before or heard of it,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's worth revisiting because it speaks to us even now in 2025 in ways you might not expect.
Oh, absolutely.
So, to set the scene,
Okay.
it's 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama.
Right in the thick of it.
We're at the heart of the civil rights struggle,
Mm.
and King is in jail.
For protesting.
Yeah, for taking part in those nonviolent demonstrations.
And then what happens?
Well, a group of 8 white clergymen,
Clergymen.
yeah, you'd think they'd be supportive,
You'd think so.
but they actually published a statement basically criticizing King.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They
Yeah.
said he was causing trouble, that he was being unwise and untimely.
Wow, talk about a slap in the face.
It was, and, King being King, he didn't just sit there and take it.
What did he do?
He used this as an opportunity.
An opportunity
To do what?
to lay out his entire philosophy of nonviolent resistance. So the letter wasn't even meant to be this big public thing.
Not at all. It was a direct response to these criticisms.
And it just became this, iconic text.
Exactly. It resonated far beyond its original context.
So what's the letter actually like? What's the tone?
Well, right away, I was struck by how King addresses his critics.
Yeah.
He's so respectful, even when he clearly disagrees with them.
Interesting.
It's like he's modeling the very behavior he's advocating for.
Meeting injustice with reason, not anger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about tone.
Okay.
He tackles some major points head on.
Like what?
Well, for one, the idea of being an outsider.
Right, the clergyman accused him of meddling.
Exactly. But King dismantles that argument so brilliantly.
How so?
He says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Wow, powerful stuff.
And, that's so relevant to us here in Southeast Houston.
You think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What happens in Deer Park impacts LaPorte, impacts Pasadena.
Yeah, we're all connected.
Exactly. We can't afford to be indifferent to issues affecting our neighbors.
That's really the heart of Think and Act locally, isn't it?
It is. We can't just focus on our own little bubble.
Right, we need to see the bigger picture.
So how does King propose we address this injustice?
Well, he outlines his 4 steps of nonviolent campaigns.
The 4 steps.
Yeah. Fact-finding, negotiation, self-purification, and finally, direct action.
So it's not just about protesting.
Not at all. It's a very deliberate process.
And he actually applied these steps in Birmingham.
Oh, yeah. He meticulously explains how they went through each step.
So the protests weren't just impulsive.
Nope. They were carefully planned and thought out.
Interesting. But he also talks about this constructive nonviolent tension.
Right. He saw tension as necessary for progress.
Like shaking things up to force change.
Exactly. He even compares it to Socrates.
Socrates, the philosopher.
Yeah, who used questions to challenge conventional thinking.
Interesting. So you're saying King wanted to spark that same kind of self-reflection.
Absolutely. And you know what's fascinating?
What?
We see this happening today in movements like environmental activism.
Yeah, sometimes it takes dramatic action to get people's attention.
Right, to force them to confront a critical issue.
But King's not just advocating for chaos.
No.
He makes a crucial distinction between just and unjust laws.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
He says we have a moral obligation to disobey unjust laws.
Even if it means facing consequences.
Even if it means facing consequences.
And he has some pretty powerful examples to back that up.
Yeah, like the early Christians defying Roman decrees.
And those guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Right, refusing to bow to a false idol.
It's about appealing to a higher moral law.
Which raises a tough question for us here in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena.
What's that?
What laws or practices today might be considered unjust by King's standards?
That's something to think about.
It is, and that's where Think and Act locally comes in, right?
We need to be informed and engaged enough to even ask these questions.
One thing I found really frustrating
What's that?
was King's criticism of those who preferred order over justice.
The moderates.
Exactly. He considered them a bigger obstacle to progress than outright segregationists.
Why is that?
Because they create this illusion of progress while maintaining the status quo.
They're not willing to rock the boat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They might say they support the cause, but they don't want any real disruption.
And you know what? I bet we see that right here in our own community.
Oh, I'm sure we do. It's easy to be complacent when things are okay for you.
But King's letter challenges us to think beyond our own comfort.
To ask ourselves What injustices are happening right here, right now?
And what am I doing about it?
Exactly. That's the key question. And that leads us to another aspect of the letter.
What's that?
King's critique of the white church.
Oh, boy. That's a tough one.
It is, but I think it's an important conversation to have.
I agree it might make some people uncomfortable, but it's necessary.
All right, so let's dive into that after a quick word from our sponsors.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're back, and we're going to talk about something I think is pretty important.
Okay.
King's critique of the white church during the civil rights movement.
Yeah, he didn't hold back, did he?
He didn't, and I think it's something we need to wrestle with even today.
Absolutely. It's still relevant.
So what was his main issue with the white church?
Well, he felt that many churches were more focused on order than justice.
Order over justice.
Yeah, like they were more concerned with keeping things calm than standing up for what's right.
That's interesting.
He even said some churches were like thermometers.
Thermometers.
Yeah, just reflecting the temperature of society instead of being thermostats.
Oh, I get it. So instead of actively working to change things?
Exactly. They were just kind of going with the flow.
That's a powerful image, and it makes me wonder, are there institutions here in Deer Park, LaPorte, or Pasadena acting like thermometers?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Like, are they upholding systems that are unjust, even if they don't mean to?
That's something we all need to think about.
It's not enough to just be not racist.
Right. We have to be actively anti-racist.
Working to dismantle those systems of oppression.
And that takes effort and awareness.
It does. And, King talks about this feeling of being told to wait.
Wait for change.
Yeah, and how for so many people, wait really meant never.
It's like kicking the can down the road.
It is, and it makes me think about the fight for environmental justice here.
How so?
How many communities have been told to wait while they're dealing with pollution?
That's a really good point.
And it highlights how urgent King's message is.
Justice delayed is justice denied.
Exactly, and we have to recognize that the systems in place often benefit those in power.
At the expense of others.
And those in power don't always want things to change.
It's about protecting their own interests.
Which is why King was so critical of those white moderates.
The ones who wanted to maintain order at all costs.
They were more dangerous than the outright opponents.
Because they gave this false sense of progress.
While actually hindering real change. So how do we avoid falling into that trap ourselves?
I think it starts with listening.
Listening to who?
To the people who are most affected by injustice.
So not just the people in power.
Right. We need to elevate the voices of those who are marginalized.
And be willing to challenge the status quo.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
That's what Think and Act Locally is all about.
Empowering people to make a difference in their own communities.
And sometimes that means being a little disruptive.
King called it being a creative extremist.
Pushing boundaries and demanding better.
He even criticized the police for using nonviolent methods to uphold an unjust system.
Wow. He really wasn't afraid to make people uncomfortable.
He understood that the means and ends have to align.
You can't achieve justice through unjust methods.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
You might look like you're doing something, but you're not addressing the root cause.
Exactly, and I think that's a really important lesson for us today.
It is, and it's something to keep in mind as we think about our own actions.
Absolutely. We need to make sure our methods match our goals.
Another thing that struck me about King's letter
What's that?
was how he connected the struggle for freedom in America to the global struggle.
Yeah, he talked about the fight for independence in Asia and Africa.
He saw it as a universal yearning.
Freedom is a human desire.
And it reminds us that we're all interconnected.
What happens here in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena is part of a larger movement.
It's a global fight for justice and equality.
And we can't afford to be complacent.
We have to stand up and speak out against oppression wherever we see it.
And King believed that change starts with the individual.
So what will you do to make a difference?
What injustice will you stand up against?
That's the question we all need to ask ourselves.
And if you're finding value in this conversation,
if you're inspired to think and act locally,
please consider supporting our show at thinkandactlocally.com/donate.
The link is in the show notes.
We appreciate your support.
And we'll be back next time with another deep dive.
See you then.
So we're back, and we left off on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Yeah, King's optimism.
Right. After all that talk about injustice and tension and struggle,
he still ends the letter on such a hopeful note.
It's really striking, and I think it's something we need to hear now more than ever.
Especially here in 2025 with so much going on in the world.
Exactly. It's easy to get discouraged.
Oh, absolutely.
But King reminds us that the arc of history bends toward justice,
Powerful words.
and that even when things seem dark, progress is still possible.
He believed in the power of hope.
He did, and it makes me think about those little victories we see happening all around us.
The little victories? Like what?
Like a new community garden in Deer Park,
Oh, yeah.
or a business in LaPorte switching to sustainable practices.
Still steps.
But there's still steps in the right direction.
And they show that change is happening.
Exactly, and King believed that those small actions add up.
It's not always about the grand gestures.
It's about everyday people doing what they can.
To make a difference in their own communities.
And he was really critical of this idea of waiting for the right time to act.
Like waiting for someone else to fix things.
Yeah, he said time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively.
So it's up to us to use our time wisely.
Exactly. We can't just sit back and wait for things to get better.
We have to be active participants in creating the change we want to see.
And that brings us back to think and act locally, right?
It's about empowering people to take ownership of their community.
To be those agents of change.
And sometimes that means getting uncomfortable.
Stepping outside of our comfort zones.
Challenging the status quo.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think there are a few key things to remember from King's letter.
Okay.
First, injustice anywhere affects us all.
We can't ignore the struggles of others.
Second, progress requires tension and disruption.
We have to be willing to shake things up.
And finally, never lose sight of hope.
Change is possible.
We have the power to create a better future.
One step at a time.
So what will you do to make a difference?
What injustice will you stand up against?
Those are the questions we want to leave you with today.
And if you're inspired by this conversation,
If you want to support our mission of thinking and acting locally,
you can find a donation link in the show notes.
we appreciate your support.
Thanks for joining us.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.